Welcome to No Holding Back with me, Susan Estrich. Each week I'll have the privilege of being joined by some of the biggest names across the worlds of media, politics, and law. Nothing will be off the table. I'll be speaking my mind and encouraging my guests to do so too. Today I'm joined by an old friend of mine. We've been across the opposite sides for many years. We've even found ourselves on the same side back in the 90s when we were both advising Bill Clinton during some difficult days. Dick Morris has been on both sides of the aisle. He's one of America's best known political commentators, writers, authors. With his wife, he authored, I think, 9 books on
Like it's
current political topics. How many, Dick?
21.
21. Well, I've read
Yeah.
9. I guess I get credit for that. And Dick has been around the block in politics, and we've been right sometimes, we've been wrong sometimes, but we keep playing this game. Dick, it's a pleasure to welcome you here today. Thanks for doing the show.
We could genuinely introduce each other as frenemies.
Frenemies, that's right. We
Yeah,
get along. We're from the old days when people actually got along. Dick, tell
that's
me
right.
something. Almost everybody thinks this race is too close to call. People ask me what I think is going to happen, and I honestly say I don't know. You've written recently that you think the race is over, that Trump has this luck. Tell us why.
Well, where do I start? He's leading in every single swing state outside of the margin of error, beyond the margin of error. He he's in the last doesn't in the reliable polling, not the stuff that's slanted with samples that are too Democrat. Trump is leading in all of them. Biden can barely walk, and Trump is ascendant. I think Trump has long since won this election, and I think it's going to be an unbelievable landslide. It'll be a landslide on the order of McGovern and Mondale and that kind of a landslide.
I'm too familiar with those kinds of landslides. I've been on the losing end
Yeah,
of,
yeah.
Minnesota, Massachusetts,
I
don't
was
be
nice enough
mistake.
not to say Dukakis, but yeah.
Yeah. Why the difference between your perception and that of, I looked at the polls this morning just to double check and see if I was completely crazy, and they show, at least on the national level, for what it's worth, a tight race. Why do you think that isn't right?
Well, first of all, if you look at almost any of the national polls, except for Rasmussen and McLaughlin and Breitbart and Harvard Harris, almost every one of the other polls have far too many Democrats and far too few Republicans in their sample. Most of them have a 10-point Democratic margin over Republicans in their sample. And the exit polling of 2000 showed 1 point more Democrats than Republicans. So garbage in, garbage out. The other thing is that, and the other thing is, I think that this is not an inadvertent error. I think just as throughout all of 2016, every poll predicted that Hillary would win resoundingly. And in 2020, everybody said that Trump, well, forget 2020, but in 2022 now, everybody is trying to make this a tight race to sell newspapers and to boost ratings. But it's not a tight race. It's long since over. And fundamentally, the American people deeply agree with Donald Trump on everything. You take any major issue, and a majority support Trump's position. There are reservations about his personality. There's controversy about the convictions, the criminal convictions. But in terms of immigration and inflation and American prestige abroad and energy and all of those issues, there's a complete consensus among the voters, except for a small number of left-wing voters who opt out of that consensus over issues like climate change and other stuff that really is not a fundamental issue in the country. And I think that Trump is very much the consensus candidate. I think that he's managed to keep his end of the deal very unified, and I think that there's a real consensus of views. I think everybody thinks that we have porous borders. I think everybody agrees that under Trump there was no inflation. Now there's huge inflation. I think everybody agrees that, as the public says in polling, by 56 to 31, we were better off under Trump than we are under Biden. And in the face of those, the question is why it isn't an even bigger margin. And I think the answer to that question is it is a bigger margin. They're just trying artificially to pretend it's not.
Let me ask you about abortion. Gallup poll recently showed that there's an intensity gap right now that for the first time favors the pro-choice side. I remember in the old days when we used to say we were one vote away from losing Roe v. Wade, and it just didn't move voters in the polls. At least the polls now suggest that abortion is moving voters. Why won't that hurt Trump?
Because the abortion issue in the minds of most women uh, has already been decided. Uh, there were 100,000 more abortions in the United States this year than last year, 1.3 million as opposed to 1.2 million. And half of the abortions are medical, not surgical. And the court stepped aside and said, we're not going to ban those. And of those, the half of the abortions that are surgical, 173,000 last year, were performed across state lines. And women literally crossed state lines to have an abortion. So when you combine the abortion pill, the ability to migrate to other states, and then add into the mix that Trump basically supports a 15-week abortion limit. His
Does
public
he?
position, well, he basically does. His public position is that there should be no federal standard at all and it should be up to the states. But he's not going to go with DeSantis and say a 6-month or a 6-week abortion thing. And most women find that it is fairly easy to get an abortion. There are not significant legal obstacles. And I think that it's an issue that voters will increasingly see as fabricated by the left, not as a voting edge issue.
You were talking about turnout and the fact that you think the majority of the polls are overcounting Democrats. I remember back in the Romney election when you predicted it would be a Romney landslide, and the difference was the turnout, again, the turnout, that more
No, the difference
young
was
Black and
no, no,
Hispanic voters turned out in that election
Susan,
than you had polled. Couldn't that happen here?
Susan, the difference back then with nothing to do with turnout. It was the storm. I forget the name of the hurricane, but it swept through the Northeast, and you couldn't do any polling for a week and a half before the election. And the last polling you could do, when you could still do phone polling, showed Romney winning because he had done very well in the debate with Obama. And then you had Chris Christie basically endorsing Obama and campaigning with him in New Jersey. And I think that switched those numbers dramatically. But I think that my most recent track record of predictions was that I wrote a best-selling book saying how Trump can beat Hillary, and I wrote another book called The
Yeah, I
Return,
remember that one. That one I read.
and I did another one called The Return, which predicted a significant and early Trump victory, and those are all coming true.
What do you think about the Black turnout, the Hispanic turnout, the young people turning out? Is there a chance that they could come and save Biden in this election, or are they going to
It's no
desert?
longer a question of turnout, Susan. It's a question of who they turn out for and how they vote. Donald Trump is right now in most reputable polls carrying the Latino vote by 3 or 4 points, but carrying it. In most polling, the consensus is something like 47 for Trump and 43 for Biden among Latinos. Uh, Among young people under 25, Trump is actually winning, and among people 25 to 35, Biden has an edge, but nothing like the edge he had in 2020. Among Blacks, it's anybody's guess, but the most polling has Trump at about 30% of the Black vote. He got 12% last time. So I don't think it's an issue of turnout there. It's a question of volition. I don't think that Blacks, Hispanics, and young people want to vote for Biden. they've decided in many cases to vote for Trump.
You mentioned debates as having a critical role in the Romney campaign against Obama. What about the debates this time around? You've got a debate scheduled for June 27th. I don't know why Trump agreed to such an early debate, quite frankly, because it
Oh, he
seems to
would agree
me
to
Biden
anything.
needs to shift the dynamics.
No, he would agree to anything to get Biden in front of a microphone, and uh, and Trump is clearly going to be dominant in that debate. And in fact, I think the debate is really more of an audition for the Democrats as to whether Biden is able to remain as a candidate or they force him out.
Do you think there's a chance they would force him out? How do you do that with a Biden convention full of Biden delegates?
He releases them, and they're not legally bound then, and they vote for whoever he wants. I do not think the Democratic Party can survive, literally survive as an institution, with the shellacking it's going to take in the polls in November, and the disaster that's going to happen in both houses of Congress. I think that there's enormous pressure on the Democrats to find themselves a new candidate. The problem they have is who. If it's Kamala Harris, she's even worse than Biden in the polls. And if it's anybody other than Kamala, you're bypassing a black candidate to run a white candidate like Gavin Newsom. And that'll eviscerate whatever support he has left in the black community. So that Biden has left. So they've got a real problem there, and I'm not sure if they can resolve it. But the one thing is pretty clear is you can't take a candidate with the kind of ratings that Biden has into the election with any hope of victory.
Why does Kamala Harris have such a bad reputation? I've known her for years. I actually get along with her. I've always gotten along with her. I think she's a smart woman and a capable politician, but her numbers are just stunningly bad. I mean, they're worse than
Well,
Biden's. Why?
yeah. Well, I think a big part of it is that the White House hasn't helped her. I think that the White House often gets leaked stories about how incompetent she is, about how the staff doesn't like her, about how there's high turnover. There
Who
was a
cares about
major
her staff
resignation.
liking her? I mean, I have to be honest. Why would
Yeah.
people care about that?
Well, with somebody they don't really know, that's an indication they look at. They shouldn't, but they do. And also her record as what record is vice president? The only thing she's done officially is to work on the border, and everybody agrees that's the worst disaster in the Biden White House. But I don't think that Biden's people really defended her. I think that they don't want to lose their meal ticket, and they are afraid that she'll replace Biden. Uh, but I don't know. That's internal Democratic politics. I used to be good at that.
Yeah,
so
I was going to say you used to be a past master at that particular game, didn't you?
yep.
What
So
about the VP stakes for Trump? Everyone is watching now. If you're right, obviously it matters who the VP is. Trump is 78 years old. He rants and raves sometimes. He can't remember things. I mean, who he picks for vice president may actually matter. What do you think of the candidates he's looking at?
I don't think it's the issue. There is a potential disability of Trump's. He remembers everything encyclopedically. I work very closely with Trump, as you know, and he never forgets anything, particularly a grudge. and I think
Well,
that,
a grudge, I'll admit, the name of the White House position he forgot yesterday or the day before. So I
yes,
guess he
he never
forgets
forgets
something.
anything. And so I think that, but I do believe that it's very significant because I think whoever picks as vice president will be the front runner for president in 2028. And I think that that's therefore it's very significant. Um, as to who he'll pick, I don't know. I don't have any advance indication of that. I'm pretty sure he's not decided. I think he's
What would you
narrowed it down to.
recommend?
I would recommend Greg Abbott. Um, I think that it puts the immigration issue center stage. It clearly frames the issue in the way we and Trump would like. And he's obviously competent and able to be president. Um, so that I would look for him. But again, I think J.D. Vance would be good. I don't know Vance personally. And I think there are other candidates who would be good. Um, but I think we're only just beginning to understand who these people are and get a glimmer as to what Trump thinks of them. When you ask who Trump should pick for his ticket, I say you shouldn't ask a political consultant, you should ask a marriage counselor.
Is he being hurt by the fact that Melania is so silent in this whole Stormy Daniels? You've said the conviction doesn't matter, the conviction's on 34 counts. It's hard to believe people
Well,
can
I
actually look at that and not be somewhat concerned.
I think that everybody sees how the trial was so biased. They understand that it was in New York. They understand that it was totally unprecedented to take a market basket of misdemeanors and claim they add up to a felony. And I think that people feel that the judge was biased and everything. But I think more importantly, voters look at Biden's record and Trump's record, and they say it wasn't too long ago that Trump was president. I well remember it. And I remember how things were then and how they are now, and there's no comparison. I don't think that this is not an abstract exercise. They just look at their lives now, their lives then, and they come to an overwhelming conclusion that Biden has screwed things up.
How is he screwed? Put on your hat for a minute of, just as a commentator and not as a partisan. How has he screwed things up? I mean, the economy, we're
Uh,
told, is very strong. We've got
if
job
inflation,
creation. We've got inflation finally under control. We've got interest rates on their way down. How has he screwed up? And what would you advise Biden to do if you were on the other side?
withdraw, withdraw. In terms of how he screwed things up, uh, the inflation rate for his administration is by far higher than any previous president in recent history. I say recent because I stopped counting in the 1950s. And I think that the unemployment rate is low, but but in terms of take-home pay and income, it's lagging dramatically. I think that the open borders is hurting the country very badly, and I think that that's a big problem for him. There can be no doubt that we've lost prestige in the world, that we're perceived as endlessly weaker than we used to be. I do not believe Putin would have invaded Ukraine. I do not believe that Hamas would have taken 1,200 lives in Israel. I do not think that Iran would let them get away with it because they were weakened by the oil embargo. Um, Let me count the ways. I think that Biden has been an absolute miserable failure as president, and I think Trump was a stunning success.
Is there anything Biden that you see Biden being able to do at this point other than withdraw? Because I don't see any real
No,
prospect of him withdrawing. He came out here, he raised $30 million on Saturday night. The money is still flowing in. What other steps should he take? He'll be well prepared for the debate. There's a danger, I suppose, that Trump could rant, as he sometimes does, and go off
I've always
script.
said about the debate. I've always said about the debate that I'll never vote for Biden, but I sure as hell will vote for his pharmacist.
Tell me what that means.
Well, I think he's on stuff that permits him to perform for limited periods of time. I think his mental acuity is way down. I don't personally think it was very high to start with, and I think that I think he's manifestly unqualified to stay in office. And I think that the Democrats don't really need that. All the problems he's given them, one of the lowest ratings of any president, in fact, the lowest of recent presidents, including Carter, uh, by far the lowest. I
I
think
worked
that
for
they don't.
Carter. I remember that election painfully well. I worked for Kennedy first and then for Carter, and I
Right,
used to do the misery
right.
index every day.
Yep, that's right. So, I mean, I just it stuns me for someone as knowledgeable as you to say that not believe that this election is very heavily pro-Trump. Um, I think it
I
would
think
be
it
a
is right now. I mean, right now I'm worried, quite frankly, because Trump worries me. You know, Biden is 81, he's 78, and Trump is worrisome for Democrats like me, very
well,
worrisome.
he's always been for Democrats like you. Part of the reason is that he's been so successful at converting the working class from Democrat to Republican. He's when you get off the boat in the harbor in New York, the first thing you learn is rich people vote Republican and poor people vote Democrat. Now that's completely flipped. Rich people are voting Democrat, and middle income working class people are voting Republican. And that's a sea change in our politics. And
It is a
I
sea
don't
change, but
think
isn't it against their pocketbook interests? I mean, my son keeps telling me that my taxes will be cut and the tax cuts will stay in effect if Trump is elected, and that by voting for Biden, I'm voting against my pocketbook. Whereas working class people have to worry about a regressive system of tariffs, which doesn't depend on a progressive income tax. Why are working class people moving to Trump?
Well, I think that they have a president who strongly supports them, who understands how to help them, and they understand the ultimate accuracy of what Laffer always said, that the more you cut taxes, the more your revenues go up. The way we balanced the budget in the Clinton administration was not by cutting spending, it was by cutting the capital gains tax. And that led to a groundswell of revenues that permitted 4 years of a balanced budget, of which I'm still very proud. Let me just say that I'm very proud that I worked for Clinton. I think he was a very good president. And I think that the Democratic Party has basically dissolved since then into a mass of issue positions that are horribly thought out. I don't think anybody in their right minds believes that a 12-year-old should be able to choose a new gender, and the school work with the parents to make sure they don't, the school work with the administration to make sure the parents don't find out. I think that there's no way you can possibly say that that's even a sane position, not just a good one. And I think that I think that it's obvious that the United States has completely turned its economic policy over to the idea of climate change. And we're not using our major weapon, which is our access to natural resources. And we're completely in thrall to a science that is not necessarily settled.
You think Trump denies climate change?
I think he feels, as he should, that it's one of a number of problems and that it can be solved and it can be addressed.
Huge problem. How do you
One of the
solve it
major things,
without
one of the
major
one of the
change
major
in
things
policy?
one of the major things Trump has done is to replace coal with natural gas in our energy mix. The proportion of our energy that comes from coal is now half of what it was when Trump took office. And I think that trend has been very good. At the same time, renewable resources is stuck at about 8 or 9% of our energy grid, and it remains basically a pipe dream. But in terms of actual progress in reducing carbon emissions, in terms of tonnage, Trump is way ahead of Biden in his accomplishments.
One last question, because I know you have to go and you've been very generous with your time. Hunter Biden, he was prosecuted by a Merrick Garland appointed special counsel. He was convicted. Joe Biden, who clearly loves his son greatly, has said he accepts the jury's verdict. He won't pardon his son. How can you keep saying, or not you, but Trump, that the Garland department is weaponized against Republicans when, in fact, Merrick Garland had nothing to do with the prosecution in New York of Trump and everything to do with the prosecution of Hunter Biden?
Well, Hunter Biden is a little bit like a hunting trophy in a room to convince people that they do go after Democrats too. And his function in that hunting trophy room is to be convicted of minor charges, which assures that nobody goes after him for what he really did, which is orchestrate this global pattern of kickbacks and bribes and corruptions that has crippled the United States vis-a-vis China. And there's no room to indict him or convict him because that slot is already taken by a fairly minor gun charge. And I think that's all a contrivance to make sure that nobody can say that they just go after Republicans and to say that we go after Hunter Biden too. But initially, remember, they tried to get him to, they got him to plea to guilty on the gun charge. And in return, and the judge said, does that mean that you're not prosecuting him for anything else? And they said, yes, that is what we mean. And the judge then refused to accept the plea bargain. So Hunter Biden has been used as a lightning rod by Joe Biden. And the conviction has been used as a way of disguising the evident bias in trying to lock up a future and a former and likely future president of the United States on charges that are irrelevant to any policy.
Well, I have to disagree with you on that, but on that note, I have to close off this conversation and hope that you'll come back later in this campaign and see whether the debates really do matter or not, and see whether this conviction really does make a difference. You've been listening to No Holding Back with me, Susan Estrich. Thank you to Dick Morris, as always, for a great conversation. You can interact with the podcast on social media by following it No Holding Back FM. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or rating whenever you get your podcasts. You can sign up to receive an email when a new episode is released at our website, noholdingback.fm. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time. Dick, thank you again for joining me.
This was fun. You take care.